Welcome to Sidetracked. This is a series where I talk about things I love or hate in game design and rant about them to you. Today, we're going to be talking about something kind of dear to my heart, something that I find personally very frustrating in game design. And I want to talk about a little bit of the history within my own experiences of this frustration. So the topic today is mana costs and the progressions within it. As you move through a game, it's not uncommon for abilities to cost more. And my gripe with this is when the ability costs more after you've somehow upgraded that ability, especially in a situation that you can't take it back. So mana costs. It's not uncommon to have some form of stamina, or mana, or focus, or some pool of resource that you're spending. And in games that I've played heavily related to the Blizzard chain of events of my life, I played things like Diablo 1, and Warcraft 3, and Diablo 2, and eventually Dota, and things like that. So we're going to be talking about some of those games in this. And there's a lot of other games out there that use these kind of mechanics. So what I want to talk about is how mana costs go up. And not every game does this exact paradigm, but many games, as you level up your character, mana costs go up. But it wasn't always this way, and not every game really follows this pattern. And I wish more games would not follow this pattern. And so here's some examples. The Death Knight. And I've got a ton of stuff up here. The Death Knight from Warcraft 3. Now, I was an undead player back in the day, 20 years ago or something, when I was playing ladder games with undead and stuff like that in Warcraft 3. And I wasn't probably very good, but I was decent at the game. The heroes in Warcraft 3 had abilities that would level up. And as they leveled up, they would gain stronger values. So the Death Knight had Death Coil, which would heal undead units, and it would damage living units, so that you could go kill some orcs or humans or whatever with your undead horde. So one of the things that is notable here is that mana cost does not go up here on any of the abilities at all in Warcraft 3. In fact, almost no ability on any hero goes up or down. And there's a few that go down, but you can see how this is a healing wave. It's a chain heal, jumps multiple times, heals different values as it levels up, but the cost never goes up. And then here's Hex, transforms a unit into a critter. Its duration increases. The parentheses is the duration on a hero. So it's a lot smaller on a hero than a regular unit, but the mana cost does not go up. Same thing with this little Serpent Ward, which was a stationary summon creature. And of course, ultimates didn't have a level 2 in the base game, in ladder mode. One of my favorite characters in Warcraft 3 for heroes was the Warden. Just fun to play. She had the default ability of Hide, which cost no mana, and was able to just hide like much of the rest of the Night Elf. The Priestess of the Moon also had that ability. But her ability of Fan of Knives, mana cost 100. Area of effect increased, damage increased, but the mana cost never changed. And then same thing here, Blink. The mana cost actually went down. That's right, down. Cooldown also went down, but notice how it's staggered here. So it goes down one level here, and then it goes down in cooldown the next level. And obviously, this was a different game than, say, Dota or Diablo or whatnot, where these costs and these cooldowns are a little more extreme than some other stuff that you might see in those games. But mana cost does not go down. So those are my 3 examples. So the Warden, the Shadow Hunter, and the Death Knight. But this is true of all of them. I could go through every single one of these heroes in Warcraft 3, and it's true of all of them. Then let's jump over to like Diablo 1. Because Diablo 1 actually, follows kind of similar to Warcraft 3. You've got things like Firebolt, and Firebolt actually goes down in cost as it levels up, and it has a pretty high cost, and there's actually no mana regeneration in Diablo 1. You have to use potions, or you get a level up in the middle of combat. So mana was a very, strong resource that you had to manage. It wasn't just, wait a couple of seconds and you'd have more. But the damage would go up. And as the damage went up, the mana cost went down. And it had a minimum mana cost, as you can see here, minimum of 3. And I think that's really cool. Now, it does create a moving target. So talk about some design here. One of the reasons I don't like mana costs going up is that it creates a moving target for the player. It means that when you load into a game, you don't know what you need to do to build your character at all. And there's a certain level of that is fun. You boot into, let's say, a very different game, a Dark Souls game, and you don't know what you're going to use. You don't know what weapons you want to some degree, but you might have some general idea. But if you've never played that game before, you're experimenting, you're analyzing, and you're figuring out your stats and things like that. But do you need 50 mana? Or do you need 70? Or do you need 700? And that's not something you're going to be able to glean very quickly in a lot of these games. And so it creates this moving target that I find personally quite frustrating, because it means that everything is constantly moving. And if everything is moving, kind of nothing really is moving. And so I prefer some things to be static while other things are moving, because it gives a cleaner dynamic between them. So in this case, Firebolt, really simple ability. It's meant to be really cheap. It goes down to a minimum of 3, allowing kind of any class to really use Firebolt. And if you're not familiar with Diablo 1, any class could learn Firebolt because it was skill books and they went into your skill card. There was no skill tree. You didn't have to learn them based on level ups. You learned them based on finding them or buying them in the world. Now we can go over to Fireball. Notice that Fireball has a much higher cost. The other one was 6, this one's 16. And yes, it does still decrease. It goes down to 10, but hey, that's actually pretty nice. So it goes down and it rewards you for leveling it up, which in Diablo 1, that generally means that you have to buy books, find books. It means that you have to kind of seek it out. And there's 10 levels. So it does take quite a few levels. What would that be? Level 7 would be about 10 mana cost, right? And Fireball is an upgrade. So when I say I don't like moving targets, I mean moving targets within the same structure. So Firebolt is its own thing, right? Fireball is a new thing. And because of this, I'm okay with this. It means that I can go back to Firebolt if I don't have the mana to deal with Fireball yet, or I don't want to deal with Fireball yet. I could use Fireball against like a boss. I can use Firebolt as a spammable spell against minions. And the same kind of pattern exists here with Lightning. You have an initial cost of 10. It goes down by 1 per level to a mana cost of 6. And then you can later get Chain Lightning because it's better, but it costs a lot more. You can see that it costs 30. So you have this design paradigm, as I'm going to call it, where you have this lower level spell that does cost less than the higher level spell. But many games, including Diablo 2, which evolved, of course, from Diablo 1, flip this on its head and go the opposite direction. So let's jump into Diablo 2 real quick. I have it open here. Let's see, which character do I want to start with? Let's start with the Druid here. So if we go into the skill tree of the Druid, let's go into his spells primarily here. So here is Firestorm, and I have that on there. So here's Firestorm. Has a mana cost of 4, and guess what? It doesn't go up. Here's Arctic Blast. It doesn't go up very quickly, but it does go up eventually. So it's not showing this, but it is 5 per second, but eventually it'll be 6 per second. Similar to Cyclone Armor, or Twister. Twister does not go up, but Tornado actually also does not go up. So you see that like some of these abilities, they don't go up and others do. And this is something that bugs me because it changes your choices very quickly and it hides a lot of those choices in a single number. See how many things are going on here? And Diablo 2 is a pretty simple game. If we're talking about something like Dota or League of Legends or other games that are more modern or slightly more modern at least, you're going to have a lot of different things changing on a skill card. So you might have, in modern Dota, you might have 5 different numbers changing at any given point, leveling up a skill. Not 1 or 2, like it used to be back in 2016 or so. We can go over to shape-shifting and notice that attack type abilities typically do not go up. See how that's 3, that's 10, and that's 3. So these don't go up. Same thing with some of the more duration-based abilities. They typically don't go up as well. So you got Werewolf, that's always 15. So if we jump over to, let's jump over to the Amazon here. We'll do the same thing here. I just want to show it off. I want to show the example here. So we've got Fire Arrow and some other stuff here. So multi-shot, Exploding Arrow, they go up. And it creates this moving target where if you were to max out Exploding Arrow, you need a ton of mana regeneration or a ton of max mana or whatever else. And balance of these things in Diablo 2 wasn't exactly the greatest to begin with because, well, if you got enough mana leech, mana steal on hit, you would be able to hit 1 or 2 enemies and completely fill your pool back up. And it was a feast or famine situation to begin with. And I'm not a big fan of that because I like more of attrition-based gameplay. I want you to manage your resources. Personally, I love games like City Skylines or Frostpunk or even Dota, where you're really kind of managing your resources. You're not just instantly refilling things. In Dota, you can only really instantly refill your mana by getting killed and reviving in the fountain, for example, which does have some strategic benefits, of course, in competitive play. But let's look at multi-shot. This is a skill that technically was broken for something like 20 years. If you get multi-shot to a high enough level, it will no longer give you more arrows. But it will continue to increase its mana cost, creating a mana trap where you wanted to actually remove skill points from multi-shot to not increase its mana cost. This was only fixed later on in Diablo 2 Resurrected. It took something like 20 years to fix this issue. And that's basically just because multi-shot only had 2 numbers scaling, arrows and mana cost. You've got stuff like Immolation Arrow, which goes up by 0.5 point per level. It's a very powerful skill, and so they wanted to have it to be quite expensive, but why not just have it be expensive up front? Tell me exactly what I need. Because especially in Diablo 2, a lot of stuff is based on items, and here's a modded item here that gives, plus to skills. And so while Fire Arrow is not a significant example of this, where it goes up by like 0.15 per level or less or something like that, I think it's 1/8 per level. Why not just make it 5? Why not just make it 3? Why have it move at all? Now, we saw that the Druid's abilities, that's his physical attacks, they didn't go up. Rabies didn't go up. It was 10 at all ranks, or 15 or something like that. So why does Fire Arrow need to go up? So just to close out here, some more examples. We'll just keep going here. If I can get it to work here. Can't find the right window. I'll get there. Okay, switching over to the Sorceress just for showing examples here. we yet again have abilities that go up. So mana cost on Firebolt is 2.5. You know, nothing too crazy, but it doesn't go up because it's meant to be kind of a low level skill, right? But you go over to Fireball, and well, it goes up 0.5 point per level again. We're right back into that. We got Inferno, which eventually goes up. You can see that, and you've got things like Blizzard, which goes up a whole point every level. Now, it's not to say that these skills aren't very powerful, but my opinion is that a lot of these skills should be more explicit in doing so. It shouldn't be, you know, these 3 skills don't and those 3 skills do, and stuff like that. But let's jump over to Dota, actually. Let's look at some Dota stuff here. And in Dota, we have all sorts of new heroes and different heroes and whatnot. And you'll quickly notice I do not pay for Dota Plus, and my heroes are stuck at like level 5 all over the place. But let's look at some different heroes here, just to drive this point home. So here's Crystal Maiden. And if we level her up a few times, we'll see that this skill right here, for example, it goes up 20 mana per level. This is basically a way to balance out her aura, and I don't like this. I don't like this one bit. And the reason I don't like this is because it just creates this constant moving target of leveling something up, especially when it comes to these smaller amounts. Now, 20 is not small in this case. You know, it's something close to 15 or even 16% there. But we already have the value here of leveling it up. You have to get the level up. You have to get all these other things. And this used to be less common in much, much older Dota, where you had an ability that might cost, for example, 150 at all ranks or 175 at all ranks, and you just used it. And you had to manage your abilities. And as these abilities have changed, you know, years ago, Crystal Maiden herself specifically was nerfed in her mana costs and her intelligence, her starting base intelligence. So she became a very low intelligence hero that relied on her aura. And that's fine for a balanced standpoint. Let's grab another hero here. Dazzle, I think, is one of the examples, and Tidehunter is going to be another one of the examples here. So Dazzle is a universal hero now. Let's create a target dummy. So let's look at this ability. This is one of the abilities that actually really frustrates me. One, it's a really strong ability that I think is totally fair to not increase and be just expensive at all levels. Two, it increases by a whole 5 points per level. I can't think of something more obnoxious than increasing by 5 mana cost. That isn't, you know, 4 or 3 or 2 mana cost per level, something like that. And so he does this little forked, there's only one dude there, but he does this little forked poison, and if he hits the target, it refreshes the poison. So he's a really strong laning hero. It's a higher cooldown and whatnot. But notice how this has so many moving parts. It increases in target, increases in damage, it increases in slow, it increases in duration, it increases in slow per hit, it increases in the split damage from his newly created facet, Poison Bloom, and it increases in, or it decreases in cooldown, it increases in mana, and it increases in range. How many different variables do you need to be increasing or decreasing at any given point in time? And so I'm speaking from a design standpoint, but also from a player standpoint, for myself, of course, that this could be simplified. There are some things that are super important for game balance, and one of them is not mana costs moving by 5. It really shouldn't be. That's my real argument. It shouldn't be. So if we move over to Tidehunter here, I'll create another target dummy here. Now, Tidehunter is a pretty simple hero, and we'll level him up a few times here. Let's look at this ability, Gush. Now the slow doesn't scale, the duration doesn't scale, the cooldown doesn't scale, the range does not scale, and the mana cost doesn't scale. It used to. But they changed that like a year ago, and it used to scale by like 5 mana. And again, I just find this irritating because the difference is so small that I find it personally meaningless. You know, he just spits water at you. But if you go over to his Anchor Smash, which looks like this, just swings his arm around and does kind of a cleaving attack, the mana cost on this does increase by 5. Now, but Zephyr, counter argument, it's a really low mana cost. So 5 is a huge percentage. It is. I agree. But why not just make it 50 at all ranks? Then it doesn't have to go to 55, and it doesn't have to stay at 40, and you don't have this moving target. And one of the benefits, I think, of that kind of design paradigm or design decision is that players can play around a mana cost. But this specifically is designed to kind of mess with your ability to play around with it. It is designed to change how you lane in Dota, because laning phase is a big deal in Dota. It changes how you handle certain time frames in Dota. And that's fine because Dota has this strategic element. But is it truly necessary? They don't feel it's necessary for Gush anymore, but they still feel it's necessary for Anchor Smash. But I also want to talk about ultimates. So Tidehunter has a huge ultimate, has not quite, 2.5 minutes of cooldown there, not quite 3 minutes of cooldown, and it goes down in cooldown by 5 seconds. Now 5 seconds on a cooldown, it's nice, but we're doing the same thing here. So we'll leave the cooldown alone for today. I'll beat that over the head another day sometime maybe. But let's look at Ravage's mana cost. 125, 225, 325. And I don't know what it was in the past. I'd have to look that up. I haven't. I apologize for not doing a little more research on that specific skill. But the point is that why is it 125 and not 150? Why 125 and not 100? Is the 25 mana so important to the balance of this game? Maybe. But should it be? Now I have, similar to the whole like firebolt, fireball relationship, I have no qualms with ultimates having large cost changes as long as they make sense and as long as they're getting the power and value out of it. Because there's less levels here and there's a lot less stuff moving around. So for example, what if this was 100, 200, 300? Or 150, 250, 350, or something like that, where it goes up 100. Now, 100 is not a small amount. We're talking about basically doubling the cost of this ability. And you can see that it's still going up by 100. That, in my opinion, is totally okay. Because, well, there's less skill levels, as I said, but it's not a small amount. And if, for example, all of your other skills didn't do this, then ultimates become special. And I'm not saying it has to be isolated to ultimates or it has to be isolated to the firebolt, fireball relationship. But I think that's where it's most appropriate to increase the mana cost. And I've shown examples of other games that did not do this. Warcraft 3 did not do this. In competitive play, it did not do this. But Dota and League of Legends do. Now, speaking on the firebolt, fireball relationship that I did in Diablo 1, we can also talk about that same relationship in other games, whether it be a game I've worked on tangentially, which is Salt and Sanctuary, where I did a rebalance mode for the game with permission from the original developer. There are abilities in that game that cost more than lesser abilities. And again, I think that's okay. Same relationship. You're finding a higher power ability, but you're not losing the lower power ability in the process. You're not just leveling it up and getting locked out. That's a feel bad moment. But it's strategic. Is it though? Is it really as strategic as we want to give it value to level up an ability and suddenly not have the mana that you need? I can understand that when it's glaringly obvious that this is going to be more expensive. But when it's 5 mana, there's a reason that video games don't do, for example, why is this not 4 mana? We like to use decimal numbers, right? We like round decimal numbers. Why are the attack damage bonuses in 5s? Notice that? Damage is always in 5s. In fact, a lot of damage is in 10s, or even 15s, or 50s. Notice how this goes up by 50 per level? Because these numbers make sense to humans. We like to think in these kind of numbers. If we wanted to really balance a game perfectly for like an AI, we'd probably start doing things in all sorts of in small fractional values. But at the end of the day, video games are meant to be played, not just run in a simulation. So we as humans, we don't like that for the most part. We like solid round numbers that are things like, for example, 150-second cooldown. Well, why not decrease it by 7 per level? Well, we could, but it might not be as appealing. And that's where I kind of rest my case. I think that this is a tool in the designer's toolbox, but I think it should be used much more sparingly than a lot of modern Diablo 2 and MOBA-like games currently do. I think it should be used more sparingly. Right now, I think it's a lot of time it's used more as a hammer and a nail type problem where, oh, well, this other game did it, so we should do it. We've done it in the past, so we should continue doing it in the future. But, for example, there are many abilities in the recent year and a half that did do this and no longer do it, like Gush. But think about what I've said today here on this little tangent of my mind about what we could be doing differently. Maybe focusing on some of the more bold changes within games and less focused on tiny minutia of, oh, this leveled up, that leveled up. What should we change? You should be giving it more power. Almost always you should be giving something more power when you level it up. So taking power away by increasing mana cost should be used very sparingly, such as, again, things like ultimates. And guess what? This one doesn't go up. Look at that. It doesn't go up. It's 1 cost at all ranks. There we go. So that's just a way to kind of prove my point that it is used already somewhat and not everywhere, but that maybe we should use it a little more sparingly everywhere. Well, that's my rambling for today. Thank you for coming and listening to my little sidetrack. And until next time, maybe you'll join me for a game review or just some gaming in general.